Hi, I'm Connor Winterton of Borrowing Tape, and I'm here today with Pascal Plante, the director and writer of the crime thriller film Red Rooms. Thank you for joining us today, Pascal.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Firstly, let's talk a little bit about the filming process. Could you please
Mhm.
tell us how long the principal photography took and what the filming process was like generally?
Yeah, it was 23 or 24 days because we did like half a day doing just metro station shots, and we kind of did the one winter day. There's one interview at the very end of the film. I'm not gonna say more, but yeah, so this is kind of like on top of, but it's mostly 23 days in Montreal and its area. And what it was like, well, we were pretty efficient doing all the courtroom scenes because the courtroom was actually a set. So we built that room, and so we were extremely efficient, and we could also do kind of more elaborate mise en scène in those shots because we knew it would be. It takes a long time in the film. I think it's almost 40 minutes of screen time in one white, overly bright room. And so the visual language of the film had to evolve as the film progresses. And so I had to kind of pull all the directing tricks out of my hat to make this single room as dynamic as possible. So this was very efficient with all the shooting for the courtroom in only 3 days, which is nuts.
Mm.
But then it was yeah, 20-ish days more in Montreal and around. And but doing the outdoor in front of the Montreal courthouse is terrible. Like just in the middle of a city. Of course, we had permits, but still, like the cars are moving and all that. So this is the exact opposite of how efficient it is when you're actually on a set.
Yes, when you
In
can control the elements
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
and then you got so many uncontrollables when you're
exactly.
out in a public space. Yeah. So as you said, the film is set in Montreal. Was there any particular significance of this setting? Was it just a practical choice to film there? Was there a symbolic significance
Mm.
to setting the film there?
Well, I guess a bit of both. I grew up in Quebec City, but now my professional life is mainly in Montreal. And the film industry in Quebec is mostly centered in Montreal, basically. And so yes, it's convenient on the one hand, but on the other hand, I really don't want it to sound like I'm piggybacking on something dreadful to make any sort of promotion on it. But like in Montreal 12-ish years ago, there was like a big trial of a notorious killer that involved a video. I'm not going to say necessarily the name, but you can take the hint. That happened in Montreal, and I think collectively it impacted a lot. We saw those images. Of course, in Canada and Quebec, the cameras are not allowed inside the courtrooms, but I remember looking just at the journals periodically, and there were these drawings, and every day, like you would follow the trial through the drawings. And I remember seeing the convicted killer in a glass cage, and how striking this image was. And so, yeah, maybe there's subconsciously a bit of that in there as well, but it's mostly because that again, the film industry is based in Montreal. This and I also do a lot of what we call soft prep before doing the actual pre-production, where a lot of the key creative partners are involved. And so I could do location scouting mainly myself with the producer. I could do casting, but also very extensively. So just do a few auditions that day, maybe a few auditions 2 weeks later, because this is where I live and it's convenient for me. We were doing that in the Nemesis film office. So it's very like casual, but yeah, I could work ahead.
Great, thank you for explaining that. I did wonder actually if there was a real event that had happened that potentially
Mm,
inspired some of the film's narrative. And recently in the UK, there was
mm,
a similar thing basically happened where two young girls were murdered. So
I
there was
know this is crazy. This happened after the film came out. Was finished, of course, but I know
Mm,
what you're referring to. This is insane. My producer actually, she put Google alerts whenever she, for instance, with keywords like red rooms, and so I think it was around Christmas time last year that it broke in the news, and how we're trying to just follow the press that's being printed about our film, but a lot of the time real life events kept popping up, which is very scary. But yeah, sorry if I cut you off, but actually the answer to your initial question is no, it's not based on a single real event. It's mostly based on the folklore, like what I was read the myth, like what I was reading online about red rooms, about videos of snuff films,
mm.
and I didn't want the psychopathic profile of the killer to be too in tune with the real killer, because again, I think it would make publicity for them, and when I say them, I mean serial killers. And I know it's a trendy keyword for thrillers and to attract an audience for a film, and yet I'm extremely ill at ease to make any sort of promotion on these bastards, because
Mm.
and they're narcissistic people who took other people's lives. Like, this is not those are not people we should celebrate in any way, shape, or form. And so I wanted the profile of the killer to be entirely fictional in the film. Yeah.
But it sounds like there was something there then for you. It was about ethics and an
Hmm.
ethical decision. And I was reading an interview that you did with Screen Daily, and you'd mentioned
Mm.
that you really like the films of Michael Haneke. I think that's how you pronounce it,
Mm.
Haneke, and he's a very ethical filmmaker, or
Mhm.
wants to take ethical approaches towards
Sure.
certain topics, and it sounds very similar.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but he's also doing very harsh films in the process.
Mm,
It's not films that they're not sugar coated in any way. Like, if anything, they're very meta experiences for the viewer, because there's the film that's going on in front of your eyes, but then there's the films you conjure up in your mind's eye, and there are in thrillers and in true crime and all that jazz. Our brain becomes hyperactive very quickly. Like, I feel we all, I don't know why, really. Like, I won't try to psychoanalyze it as to why, but like, we just make these scenarios in our brain. We
mm,
Whenever there's a killer, there's a case, there's victims, we always want to piece pieces of the puzzle together. But it's also, I think, as an audience, we're a bit bloodthirsty in the entertainment we seek. And I'm not puritanical in any way. Like, I could watch anything. Like, I can watch a gory, dumb, fun film and not be shocked at all. Like, this is, I'm not hinting that I'm a prude in any way with the entertainment that I consume myself. And yet, I still feel sometimes when you want to create a film that is a bit analog to real life, well, then violence and the way you depict violence, yeah, you have a lot of responsibility about it. And the film basically, yeah, in a meta way, in a Haneke-like way, not that
mm.
I'm comparing myself because he's a master, obviously, but it still operates in this fashion, I feel, a bit. It tries to, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminded me when you were talking there as well. That reminded me of his films like Funny Games or
Mm.
Cachet, like Hidden. It's like anti-horror films, anti-thriller films. And I'd read that you'd called Red Rooms like an anti-serial killer film.
Yeah, maybe I did once, but and yet Funny Games is one of the more unsettling film, there is, way more than sometimes way gorier and more intense films out there on a graphic level, let's say. And the only graphic violence depicted in Funny Games is the one we cheer about. Like, I don't know if you have it fresh in your mind, but there's one
Mm,
scene with a shotgun, and then the
yes.
filmmaker basically breaks all the rules, and he's like, nope, you shouldn't have cheered. Basically, this is almost telling the audience, and he rewinds it, and
Mm,
then, like, trapped again in this gloomy. But most of the violence is depicted off screen. But the point is, why is it that unsettling is because the psychological effect of violence is relatable. And a lot of films, you know, if you watch a Tarantino film, it's not relatable and it's fun in other ways, but it's not there's no psychological trauma that you can cling on to as an audience and be like, oh my God, I would react this way. And this is very unsettling. And and when we think about it, not that many films do that. Not that many films are actually very overly conscious about the psychological impact of the violence they depict, and the characters, they don't act accordingly. And so the film becomes more fantasy like escapism more than something you relate to. And I think in Red Rooms we try to make the film becomes expressionistic as it moves along. Like it doesn't stick to sheer realism, and
Mm,
yet the violence and the psychological consequences of violence remain relatable as much as possible, even though the film finishes in a Suspiria like very expressionistic way, I feel.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I teach some courses on things like about like violence in cinema, and you've essentially just summarized most of that there. That was great, thank you. And
Mm,
I'd love to analyze some of Haneke a bit more, but let's keep the focus
mm.
on you and Red Rooms. So my next question was, Red Rooms, and we're talking about psychology. Red Rooms dives into the psychology of what some have called serial killer groupies.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, what kind of drew you to this, and how did it inspire the characters of Kellyanne and Clementine?
Well, this is the very first thing that inspired me to do this piece. Just like, for instance, I would watch a true crime doc, and just for the record, like I like true crime like any other person, but I'm not obsessed with it. Like I know some people are very into it to an almost unhealthy degree, whereas I just keep in touch with the genre as much as any other genres. But let's say I'd watch a Netflix doc about a killer, and usually there would be maybe a few shots, like out of a 6 hour series based on a narcissistic killer that we go into detail about his evil mind. There would be a few shots about people that flock around these people. And I kept telling myself, like, this is like, I want to see a film about them. This is very intriguing and very fascinating. And so I did lots of research, as always. This is my third feature film, did lots of shorts, and the research, like I don't write films about my own personal experiences, like but I binge research basically. And the groupies are the first thing that led me to other things, with most notably like the red rooms per se, or the dark web, that whole folklore of violence on screen. But the groupies themselves were the starting point of the whole thing. And it's such a complex phenomenon that I didn't want to necessarily have only one single character to embody this whole complex, yeah, again, phenomenon. So I needed at least two opposite end of a wide spectrum. And I think Kellyanne and Clementine, they're very, very dissimilar. Like they're basically the opposite. And so by making them both coexist, I think one can say, oh, but there's this whole spectrum. And if it were a documentary, maybe there would have been 10, 12 characters that each have their own fascination, and yeah. And so I knew it couldn't just be a lone wolf type character, because again, there's so few of these characters in narrative fiction that I feel there's a responsibility to depict them right. So that's what started the whole thing. But then I got caught in the genre film components of it, where Kellyanne ended up becoming this ghost-like presence. She started very material in the research that I did, and it became this almost spectral, otherworldly entity in a weird way. But this was the process. This is just started with research and then became more of a fantasy film in a way. Yeah, if it
I think
makes
it's interesting what you're saying about the phenomenon of that. Was
sense.
the film where was it Zac Efron played the serial
Oh,
killer
yeah,
Ted Bundy? Do you remember that? And then there was
yeah,
all this stuff came out, like people on social media saying about how
yeah.
hot Ted Bundy was. and then all this kind of stuff around. And I think it's deeply disturbing, but also fascinating, isn't it? The
Mm.
psychology behind that.
Oh, of
Um,
course, of course.
yeah,
Yeah, no, no, of course. But this very particular, like, I mean, let's say, like Zac Efron playing Ten Buddy, it's been, yes, of course, depicted a lot online, and people were kind of uh, maybe against the choice. But it's also because uh, he's obviously, like, I guess by standard canons of beauty, like a beautiful guy, charismatic guy, and so
mm,
yeah, in our film, in my film, the killer needed to be very banal, and that's not to take away anything from the performance of Maxwell McKay-Blocos, who plays the killer. He doesn't say a word, but he still has a big presence in the film, obviously. And but I wanted a guy that looks like your neighbor. Like in real life, when horrible stuff happens, 99% of the time, you have like the neighbors in Vox Pop in the news, and they're like, "Oh, he was like." Regular looking, like I couldn't have suspected that he was doing this. You know what I mean? It's like the banality of evil
mm,
is felt more attractive because if on the one hand you have Zac Efron and on the other end you have an ugly like killer looking, like somebody who looks like a killer, it's almost written on his forehead. Like I think then it's not as scary. And just having a face in the crowd, somebody that resembles, looks like your neighbor, makes it more anxiety inducing, and even down to Kellyanne herself. Like I think Kellyanne is a character that people look at with, they have a red flags, obviously, like there's a sense of danger around her. But so for me, it's actually narratively important to see her take the metro, for instance, just be doing something, just being a face in the crowd, walking, roaming the courthouse like some other regular person. Yeah, just point being, it's important to have them relatable in society, and for that, it needed to be very banal. The killer, the choice of
mm.
the killer,
Yeah, and I
Zac
wanted to
Efron.
actually just delve a little bit more into Kellyanne as a character. You know, reading
Mhm.
some reviews as a character, she's been described as gripping but also icy. Um,
Mhm.
what was the process like in crafting quite a cold but mesmerizing character, and how did you work with the actress to kind of capture this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one word about Juliette, Juliette Gariepi. So it's her first substantial role in the narrative, like her first lead role, basically in a fiction film. She's an actress. She's a former model, so she had many things that I was looking for the role. But we did a good old fashioned like casting call, and she's the one that nailed her audition the most, or felt the more intriguing, because that's also a big part of the character. I keep saying this and I'll repeat it here, but like the film can only function if you look at her the way she looks at the killer, like not knowing as little as possible and yet being obsessed yourself, basically, like just cannot look away kind of thing.
Mm,
So
yeah.
she needed to have the killer could be banal, but she needed a weird, like magnetic charisma. And I think Juliette definitely has that. Yeah, and how did I shape her? Um, I guess the medieval stuff came a bit after. I really didn't want her to be kind of a Lisbeth Salander 2.0, because there are so few examples of female, like anti-hero female leads, that we cling on to the one that we know and the cultural reference that we know. And if you have like a dark hacker-ish character, of course you're going to be compared to that, to the Lisbeth Salander character. So at one point, I almost wanted consciously to make Kellyanne way different, even down to her clothing and her other field of interests. But just also, it just goes to show about, we've had how many Travis Bickle like characters in the history of cinema, like a man, like a loner, obsessive, kind
Mm,
of dark protagonist. And there are how many women can you name? Can one name? Like very few. And it just goes to show, like, to me, that's also what's stimulating for me as a creator, that just trying to come up, if you are gonna come up with a film, at least maybe expand a little bit on the references we have, and yeah. So there was Lisbeth Salander, and maybe now there's a Kellyanne, and maybe a few years from now there's going to be other examples. Yeah, just again, how many Travis Bickles are there?
Yeah, and I think that Kellyanne is an important character within that. Actually, when you were saying about Elizabeth Salander, who I did think of when watching the film, and when I
Good,
was in
which is good. It's good then.
yes,
I'm
so I
happy.
mean, when I was in university, I'd written a paper on the girl with the dragon tattoo, and writing about how actually, as a kind of anti-heroine, but how she's not necessarily tied to being sexualized or
Mm,
objectified or all these other
mhm,
things, and stands
mm,
out then as quite a significant heroine or anti-heroine. And I think Kellyanne, fits that as well.
mhm.
Um,
Well,
so
no, thanks for bringing it up, because I'm obviously like a man writing women, but then the actresses themselves, I give them a lot of liberty, and also, like, for what it's worth, like behind the camera, we're like half and half. Like there's so many women in creative key roles, and I keep telling people, like, try to counter the maybe a gaze that I can have on them that can be a
mm,
bit off, or the DOP is a man, but he's a queer gay, like he's a gay guy anyway. But so maybe that helped also. But the point being is that I'm being very careful about my own biases when it comes to how I would maybe objectify or sexualize someone, even if it's not something conscious, like it's something that can very much happen, not knowingly. And
mm,
so I keep telling people, if that happens, like, please tell me, I'm not going to be offended, and it's a creative process, collective creative process. And I give them Kellyanne, Juliette, Clémentine, Laurie, her name is, the actress. Basically, they're doing their homework and they propose to me on the day. Like, they're not just acting out the fantasy character that I written. Like, they become something else when they put the meat around the bone, and they do their work, I feel. And then
mm.
I work from them. They don't work from me as much. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for explaining that, and thank you for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this interview.
Thank you.
So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connor.